Okay, so my reflections on embodiment coaching. So, who the hell am I to be talking about this? Well, I've been training embodiment coaches or coaches to work with the body for, God, about a dozen years. So I think I'm probably one of the innovators of this work in Europe, though there are, other good ones now here, and there's certainly a few other people in this space in the States. So I run an online course, which is 6 months long. I think we're in our fifth year of that next year. And we've done in-person work here in the UK, in Moscow, in all sorts of places. I've probably worked in about 50 countries, helping coaches work with the body more and mentored a load of people, top of trainees in that. Okay, enough blah, blah, blah. So what this video is going to be is basically just some reflections on my time kind of working with coaches, helping them work with the body. What I've seen works, just some general thoughts on it really. Bit of amusing. I think if you're a coach who already works with the body, who wants to work with the body, this might be interesting. Also, I think there's another group of people I've worked with quite a lot who might find this interesting, a sort of body people, body workers, dancers, yogis, martial artists, who go, maybe I can go into coaching. So that might be interesting to that group of people too. Okay, where to start? Let's start with the negative. That's always good. So I think there's loads of fluff in this space. There's loads of sort of stuff that sounds good, but isn't actually teaching anyone anything. What you'll see just generally in the personal growth space is what I'd call sort of mimetic spread as opposed to learning. What do I mean by mimetic spread? I mean things that sound good. So if someone says, I don't know, the essence of leadership is vulnerability. All right, that sounds nice, right? You go, oh, sign me up for that. Yeah, that's great. Nod along to the TED Talk. But what does that actually mean? What are we learning? What are we talking about? And I think, unfortunately, the sort of, body coaching space is full of that kind of thing, where you go, all right, what can you actually do differently? Yeah. It's full of sort of very fluffy language, what we call non-operational language. Yeah, and just stuff that's just not very clear, if I'm honest. And it's kind of been, really the mission of me, my company, to make things clearer for people who want just some concrete tools. So what works? Well, before I get to tools, I need to take a little bit of a step back. So often people come and they say, hey, give me the tools, I'm fine, but my clients aren't, and I need some tools. Give me the tools. And I go, okay, great, we'll definitely do that. However, you do need to look at yourself. And body coaching always comes from the coach, right? This is my embodiment, is what I'm coaching through at any time. That's the lens with which I see my client through. It's the relationship that I have with my client. It's the creative ideas I come up with as a coach. It's how I'm impacting them, influencing them, all those things. My coach is modeling on me. The coach is feeling through me. The coach is like there's no getting out of that. There's no clean place to stand. So the first thing I'd say we've learned over the years is you really have to bring a lot of awareness to what someone as a coach is doing, how they're landing, their presence. That's not obvious to people, even people that have done quite a lot of personal growth, interestingly. It's not obvious. Secondly, it's like, okay, you've got some awareness, well, that's great, but you need more than just awareness. You need to build a bit of range in the coaching, right? So it's building a bit of range so that they go, all right, I can be coach in different ways. So my coaching, for example, habitually might be more kind of yang, challenging. We might say fiery. We use a 4 elements model. Now that is not necessarily so helpful. So it's like, okay, what other modes do I have? Sometimes coming back, opening up a little bit. That's in terms of state changing, but also in terms of building the range of the sort of possible traits that I have access to. State changing is always kind of hard work. It's you can do it relatively quickly, but it is always a certain, you need to be conscious, you need to sort of apply a technique, and it will always be difficult if you're going to the edge of what's normal for you, right? Whereas if you're doing practices over time, this is what we're very big on, you as a coach, you build that range. You build that range of what's possible and also what's easy, yeah? Okay, so that's the first thing, pointing the coachee to that. Another one is actually we when we train coaches, we almost have to look at how they learn. It's to really examine, what is learning, because we tend to think of learning as learning about things rather than learning to do things, skills-based learning or even ontological learning. Got that term from Newfield, who I used to work with years ago. coaching organization, and learning of being, different ways of being. I quite like a skills model though, because it's very concrete. And when I've trained coaches, I'm like, here are the skills you need to learn. We have an embodied intelligence model. You can start with books, different videos, and really break that down and say, look, as a coach, you need these 8 different embodied intelligence skill sets. And I think breaking it down that way means that it's not so kind of fluffy or abstract, and then we can build them up. And generally we build them up over time, so it's not 8 things at once. We go, all right, these are the basic skills you need: so self-awareness of states, of traits, self-regulation, and it's like we build them up gradually. I think one thing we've got quite good at as a company is knowing how to give practices to coaching students so that they, one, do them. That's not as obvious as you might think. It's quite difficult to get that kind of behavioural change. And the other one is you just don't overwhelm people. You just gradually layer it in, build up. And we've had, quite a lot of years' experience doing that. And it's not immediately obvious. You can't just throw a bunch of stuff at people and say, right, do that. One, because they won't do it. People just don't do it. You have to have peer groups, and we have a course manager and accountabilities, and we really explain why it's important, and make it manageable. Here's how you can fit it in your day. But 2, just too much too soon for people, right? And actually, I've learned that working with the body, it's confronting with people. There's a way in which it's not bring stuff up. So coaches might come and again say, show me the tools, but it's like, okay, you are going to go through a confrontation. I guess one more thing I've learned training coaches over the years is, yes, you can teach them techniques, but it's about themselves, yes, but themselves where and with who. So we tend to think of embodiment, like we think of most things in our culture, as this kind of unique, individualized, atomized kind of thing. Instead of being like, okay, we're always embodied in place. Like I moved towns just under a year ago. I'm in the natural world. It's very different in my life now. It affects me. I live by a river, just there. Just kind of throw a stone at it. That impacts you. The country you live in, the town, the environment, natural world, etc. And the other one is the environment, like the people you're in. Like that is as much part of learning embodiment. We learn, yes, we can learn skills, we can learn techniques, but there's also just the kind of way embodiment moves through people. The way embodiment, how can I put this? Transfers, like this. I have just had students in my house, and some of it is like I'm telling them things, verbally. Another one is I'm showing them things. I'm checking they can do things. That's the skills learning, not just the telling. Yeah. And the third one is just being around me, being around each other. How is it to be in a body? How is it to be around these 2 students that were just here? One that's more junior, one that's been studying embodiment a bit longer, and you can see the difference. And just them just being around each other is part of the learning. Yeah. And sometimes that's the experience people embodiment kind of rubs off, if you will. Another way of looking at it, though, is learn different things. So it's like one is over boundaried, one is under boundaried, for example. Yeah, okay, so you can learn that cognitively. You can give some people a skill, and we have things for that. But also just being around each other and going, okay, that's another way of being. That's another way of being that's possible to me, and maybe I want to be halfway there, not fully where they are. All right, so modelling, nature increasingly, just does a lot of the work. So we do quite a lot of retreats now for coaches. We teach online, and we always encourage people as part of that to spend time in nature every day. And sometimes they're like, why? Go for a walk in the woods, why? And they realise like how it gets people in the body. The other one is we do retreats. We did this year. We did Slovenia, Austria, and got Lisbon coming up next month. And it's a few sort of nature retreats, and usually in beautiful places, relaxed places, just to make it pleasant. And what I see in those retreats is coaches just drop into their bodies, and then you hardly need to do anything as a coach. You're almost just being present with someone. A little bit of kind attention goes a long way as a coach. So yes, we can add clever techniques, we can do lots of things, but really kind presence from a body that's had practice, had community, and been in nature, those 3 things, probably in the opposite order actually, those 3 things are what makes a difference. So if you say, if you can think of this as like you can be an embodied coach, or you can do embodied coaching, or you can do both, right? So an embodied coach is simply someone who's embodied, or consciously embodied, or more deeply embodied than is typically, the typical sort of unconscious embodiment someone will have, doing any old coaching. Right? And then we've got embodied coaching techniques, embodied coaching as a modality, and then you can be embodied and doing those modalities. So it could be one or the other, right? Or both. Or neither, which would be a shame. And that kind of brings me to why would you bother doing embodiment anyway? as a coach, right? For me, it's sort of obvious now. It's hard to, it's 10 minutes in, and I've just got to that question. So if I'd have planned this, I probably would have put it at the beginning. But okay, why? Well, one, it's just part of our being, right? It's part of our makeup as human beings. So to ignore it would be a mistake, as it would be to ignore any part of our being. However, it's a bit deeper than that, a bit more useful than that, because it's often the part that's ignored. So it's two reasons. One, it's often ignored, and two, it's the easiest to access. So I'll tell you more about one than the other. So why is it often ignored? Because we live in a sort of hyper-cognitive culture. It's not the thing people often look at. It's people, obviously, sometimes the body is just dismissed as a sort of brain Uber. And, that means you're missing a trick. Yeah. Also, it's the most easily changed. Why is it the most easily changed when it's so often ignored? Well, one, it's just obvious because it's ignored. It can be kind of like, just obvious. The other one is that the body is what we could say is the most manifest part of ourselves. So what do I mean by that? It's not an abstract hippie term. It's visceral. You can get hold of it. You can move it. So we have emotions that are sort of bodily, sort of you can get hold of them, like you can see them. And then we have mind, which you can only experience subjectively, and unless you're psychic, I guess, you can't experience in someone else, you can't see it, consciousness. And then maybe we have sort of spirit or soul or something else, which is even more abstract, right? Whereas the body, it's like I can, as a coach, just concretely, concrete would be the English word, I don't quite like that when applying to the body, but it still makes sense. Concretely, I can say, change your posture, or do this with your breath, or walk this way, Aerosmith technique. And when I do that, it's very practical. It's like straight to the point. Whereas if I say to someone, change your thinking, well, how, right? Like we're going to have to go through another mechanism, do a mantra, do some awareness training, something else. Whereas the body, we can we can actually get out. Yeah. This is why we like things like, I don't know, intimacy, right? Like, why do we like touch with people we love? Because it's a way in, it's a way to reach someone. Yeah, it's physical. So I think there's something in that which just makes it powerful. So for me, if you don't work with the body, you're probably not doing that powerful work. There's also just a sense, as well as powerful work, is like it goes deep quick. That's what I tend to find. And the last part, impacts people strongly. People are shocked, actually, by the impact often of working with the body. The next part there is stickiness. So you can think about something, you can read a book, but your behavior won't necessarily change. Whereas when we work with the body, that's the practice. We get it in the muscle, get the stickiness, get the behavioral change. This is really, really key. So that, I guess, is why I work with the body. And, personally, I just find it interesting. And I think there are lots of other valid ways to work, lots of good ways to work. This is just one I've specialized in because I had the martial arts background. So for me, it was like, well, yeah, coming out of that. And I guess seeing people like really change in martial arts, I think some martial arts last weekend, some students of mine, you see people really change. It takes a lot of time, and it's often not very conscious what the change is. It's often just sort of a bit random. It takes a long, long time. It's not always very. Sometimes it's just sort of an island. It's just like always changing the whole life as a result of it. I mean, sometimes do it with enough time. It's not very efficient in that way. And also for me, it's just like how can I put this? A lot of barriers to entry. So not everyone's going to roll around or do kung fu or something like that. So to be able to take some of that wisdom and put it into a format through coaching that fairly normal, average, everyday people can do who might not do a martial art, or at least not in the first instance, that's great. That's great. So there's that. And I just regularly hear clients say this is a bit quicker. Years ago, I remember one very senior Israeli coach said to me, now I get my results in 4 sessions instead of 8. And he made the joke that he's making less money now, which was, was a joke because of course he was getting more referrals and the clients were happy. But the joke was he took less sessions to do the same job. So that was cool. All right. Good. What else? Okay, techniques. So again, it's not so much the technique that's the main thing, but it's good to have some techniques. I mean, time and time again, I've seen the same few techniques. People report back do really well. So I mean, centering is just a quick win for coaches, and if I just do a very short course, I always teach that. So it's state regulation. So your coachee is only as smart and creative as the state they're in. Right, you could have you'd be coaching Einstein, but if he's stressed out of his head, he wouldn't be very smart. Yeah, he wouldn't be coming up with good solutions, creative solutions to his problem. So the state regulation is just massive, particularly I think in the modern world because everybody's so stressed out. You know, people are struggling in so many ways. Just the state of the world, it just seems to be the case. And you know, if you talk to coaches that have been around a while, you know, myself included, they all seem to say, like, you know, things have got busier, things got more stressful. Maybe it's the tech, it's the economy, it's all these different factors. But the state regulation is just, it's gone from being a nice to have to almost like, it's almost impossible to coach without it, I would say, just the way people turn up to coaching a lot of the time. So the centering, and that is an art, you know, and again, like, you can't think of, what I'm saying about techniques isn't separate from what I said before about being, right? Like, I've practiced a lot of centering, so it's normal for me. So when I teach the technique, yes, it's the clever words and the good technique, and there's ways to do it that will get through to the client, and different things for different clients. You need to know multiple ways. Yes, yes, yes. But it's my own centeredness. Sometimes we play games with this, and we say, you know, just use the word bananas to help someone get more centered, right? And obviously, it's not bananas. You know, obviously, it's like bananas, bananas, bananas. Tone of voice, embodiment. That being said, there are some things with language. You know, you do need to know your way around certain things. One of my students today said, "What's the difference between grounding and centering?" And I, sent quite a long response. Well, it depends what you're talking about and who's doing it. And you know, most people, honestly, they're pretty loose with that stuff, those kind of words, and they're honestly, I think we could, as an industry, do a lot better than how those kind of self-regulation techniques are normally taught. I see fashions come and go. You know, I saw sort of Huberman the other day saying the physiological sigh is the best way to down-regulate something. And I was like, how do you know that, Andrew? Come on, Mr. Huberman. You haven't tested all the centering techniques. This is just one that, you know, there's some nice evidence based on. It's a good technique, you know, but for some people that would make them more anxious, you know. Also, it's like hasn't been tested against all the centering techniques that exist, because there's hundreds, thousands maybe of different techniques. So, yeah, you know, that might be a fashion, or box breathing might be a fashion. There's different things. I much prefer to teach coaches principles, right? So it's like, okay, here's a set of principles for teaching centering, for doing centering. It's way more important than the single technique. You know, if you want a single technique, you can look at ABC centering, put that in, and you'll see a skinny young version of me teaching that on YouTube. If you want just a technique, there's lots of techniques, but that's one. Yeah, but the principles is really key. And again, I'm not going to try and get them all across in a short video. Principles is way more important. All right, so we've got principles, we've got techniques. Centering is the first one. We use something called Embodied Toolkit. That has been very good because it's kind of, it's archetypal, so it gives reference points. And we use the 4 elements, which is a really cool system. You know, we use 4 elements for like helping clients brainstorm, you know, 4 different ways to look at an idea by changing the body. If you change the body, the ideas change. You just go through 4 different bodies, get 4 different sets of ideas. That's great. Really cool. People like 4 elements, but it's also kind of broad. So the toolkit is much more specific. There's 26 of them. So instead of just being like fire, it will be like, right, here's a pose for passion we can use if you want to explore that. Here's a no pose for exploring boundaries. Here's an entering pose. Here's a warrior pose. They're all kind of under the umbrella of fire in some ways, just to give one example. Yeah, those are very versatile and people really get it. Like, you put someone in no pose, and they, again, YouTube videos on that if you want details. They really sort of go, oh, okay, this is what a boundary feels like. This is what it is to say no. That makes total sense. That could be a way to show something to a client, like to build awareness. But it could also be a way to change a state, or to give them practice, a nice, short, efficient, powerful practice, so they can work on the trait, homework, essentially, as a coach. So, yeah, toolkit, people just consistently like, yeah. All right. So centering, toolkit, 4 elements. These are models we work with. Cycles you need a model of. We talk about the U curve a lot in a coaching session, which is like the structure of beginnings, middle, and ends, and sort of how things flow. That's really important if you're working with embodiment, to understand that. There's other cool models like 5 rhythms and Theory U and other things, but you need some sort of flow model, I would say, when you're working with embodied coaching. What else? Oh yeah, another technique, something called distinction coaching. This is one of the things I use most often when, how can I explain this briefly? So when somebody is making a mistake repeatedly or is stuck, it's usually because they've taken 2 things and put them together and they need to separate them out. Let me give an example. It will get clearer. So for example, let's go with the boundaries one again. So somebody has said, right, having boundaries is the same as being aggressive. There's 2 things, being aggressive and there's boundaries. And they've gone bloop into one. totally unconsciously to do with their conditioning. They didn't actually think that necessarily. If they have, you need to, work cognitively and just make sure there's that distinction. But then you need to get the distinction in the body so they can practice the healthy one, and they don't have to take on the unhealthy one, which is what's keeping them from the healthy one. It takes me an hour or so to teach that, but that's a little quick overview. That's distinction coaching. That often is there. And of course, with any coaching, beliefs are there in the body. There's a body that goes at every set of beliefs. It's just, as I said, the body's just kind of like a way in, right? Whether it's to reveal the beliefs or whether it's to shift them, shift them. Establishing practices with the client, that's really key. I think over time, I've really come to realize establishing practices that are doable, that are enjoyable. I often say to my students now, they say, what should I practice for this? And I'm like, the best practice is the one you do. And then, can we make that targeted so that you're actually building the skill you want to work with? And the danger of just doing anything is people just deepen their own patterns. So yeah, it can be very helpful to sort of target it a little bit. But again, key thing is pleasure, ease, doability, social support. That's what I've come to realize. All right, some other reflections. We have exams at the end of our course. It just wasn't that long ago, a month or so ago. I marked a whole load of video exams for another year with my colleagues, and we have certain standards for that. We have quite a strong sort of inter-rater reliability. We tend to agree on what we're seeing. How language is used, consent, so the kind of ethical side, which it sounds like, being unethical, I don't hit my clients. Well, no, but clearing up how consent is, so people are really working with the body in a choiceful way, using what's called calibration, not too much, not too little. That's really important. The U curve I mentioned. What are the mistakes I often see? People impersonating me too much, using my mannerisms, and I'm like, no, get the principle, get the deep sense of it, not just the affectations. I don't know. What I say when I'm looking at consent is, who's the boss? And it's the client, right? Trying to establish that the client is agentic, that they're in charge, that they don't have to do anything they don't want to do. But that's just a mannerism of saying it, right? So when I hear students say, who's the boss? I'm like, no, you need to find your way of doing this, not just copy the mannerisms. I mean, that's normal in any junior student. And, as students get more advanced, they bring their own kind of way of looking at it. Responsiveness. So an intermediate to a good coach is really tuned in to the relationship. So why kind of YouTube videos are weird, right? I'm trying to teach you, but who the fuck are you? Hello, I don't know where you are. I don't know how you are, where you are, what time of day it is, what mood you're in, your energy levels, culture. I mean, culture's a thing we're obsessed with in embodiment. And it's no, none of that. So how do we have a relationship? Me and you, hi. It's crazy. Yeah, we're not wired for that. So, good teaching, good coaching, good facilitation. It's always relational. It's always responsive, not just doing the thing regardless, kind of have to in this format. Yeah, this is why YouTube's never going to be as good as a classroom where I can tune into the group. Did you get that point? Am I going too fast? Do you understand my crazy British accent? Whatever it is, Good. So relationality, sensitivity, mentioned cultural piece there. We're a little obsessed with that. As well. A lot of embodiment out there comes from the States, tends to be a bit culturally blind. So bringing the cultural piece in, particularly the work I've done. Trauma-informed, oh my God, I'm out of time because I've got a coaching call, but that's another huge thing I could say, not going crazy with that, but being aware of it, being trauma-informed, not trauma-deformed. Yeah, so that is all I've got time for today, unfortunately, but there's a few, I could have gone on for another hour, I think, a few reflections on this. If you're interested in working with us, look up Embodiment Unlimited. We have coaching courses, usually one starting in Feb and one starting in September every year. The main one is the beginning of the year, the Feb one, the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. And then we have the Toolkit course, second half of the year, which is usually a bit shorter, a bit more compact. So there are courses, look those up. Get in touch, maybe if that's helpful or not. I hope this ramble was useful.